The alarm on Elijah Webb's phone went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was scheduled, because his body had stopped trusting sleep somewhere around the third year of this job. He was already at his desk by the time the sun began pressing against the curtains of his Washington apartment, already 3 emails deep into a funding dispute between the Georgia Department of Education and a consortium of rural school boards who believed the new Title I allocation formula discriminated against predominantly white districts. The irony of that particular complaint would have made him laugh on a different morning. This morning, he just flagged it for his policy director and moved on. His office at the department was 14 minutes from the apartment by car 22 on foot when the weather allowed. He walked. He had walked every morning for the past 11 months because his doctor had told him his blood pressure was sitting in a range that had a clinical name, and because the walk was the only 30 consecutive minutes of the day when nobody could reach him with anything that required an immediate decision. He passed the same coffee cart on the corner of D Street every morning. The man who ran it was named Terrence, and Terrence had stopped asking how Elijah was doing about 6 months, in which Elijah appreciated more than he could have explained. Some mornings, the silence of a person who expected nothing from you was the most generous thing available. By 7:15, he was at his desk on the 4th floor of the Lyndon Baines Johnson building, and by 7:30, his assistant Paulette had delivered the day's briefing packet along with a coffee that was already slightly too cold, which was how it always arrived, which was something Elijah had accepted as a permanent feature of his existence at the department. The briefing packet was 41 pages. He read 27 of them before his first call began at 8 o'clock sharp. The call was a conference with the governors of 12 states regarding the Equal Opportunity in Schools initiative, which Elijah had spent the better part of 14 months designing, revising, presenting, defending, revising, again, and finally shepherding through a congressional subcommittee that had tried to kill it on 4 separate occasions. The initiative was at its core a straightforward piece of federal guidance tied to Title VI funding compliance. Any school receiving federal dollars was required to demonstrate through auditable documentation that students were receiving equal access to educational resources regardless of race, economic background, or admission category. The language was precise. The enforcement mechanisms were real. Elijah had made sure of both because he had spent enough years watching beautifully written policy dissolve into nothing the moment it encountered the indifference of local administrators who knew that nobody was actually watching. Governor Harlan Marsh of Tennessee spent 11 minutes on the call arguing that the initiative represented federal overreach into decisions that properly belong to states. Governor Sandra Whitfield of Alabama raised concerns about the reporting burden on smaller districts. Governor Paul Kettner of Ohio, who had supported the initiative from the beginning, said nothing for the first 20 minutes and then made a single point so cleanly that Marsh went quiet for nearly a minute afterward. Elijah moderated, redirected, conceded 2 minor points of implementation. Language held firm on everything that mattered, and by 9:45 had the commitments he needed from 8 of the 12 governors. The other 4 would come around once the legal opinions from their own attorneys made clear they had no viable alternative. He was closing out the call when Paulette knocked twice on the open door and held up a small piece of paper with 2 words written on it, Amani's birthday. Elijah looked at the paper. Then he looked at the date in the corner of his computer screen. Then he looked at the paper again. He had known in the abstract way that a person knows things they have not allowed themselves to fully feel that his daughter's birthday was coming. It had been on his calendar. It was still on his calendar, flagged in blue, the color Paulette used for personal items, as distinct from the red of federal obligations and the green of congressional appearances. He had seen the blue flag 3 days ago. He had thought, I'll call her tonight. He had not called her that night because there had been a budget amendment crisis that consumed the evening, and he had thought, I'll call her tomorrow. Tomorrow had also not worked out. Imani Renee Webb had turned 12 years old at some point during the morning, while her father was on a conference call with 12 state governors about equal opportunity in schools. The governors were still talking. Elijah unmuted himself long enough to say that Paulette would follow up with each office by end of week, then ended the call. He turned to the credenza behind his desk, where a framed photograph sat between a stack of policy briefs and a small clay pot Imani had made in an art class when she was 8 and given him for Father's Day, with the solemn instruction that he was not allowed to put anything in it because it was just for looking at. The photograph was from September, her first day at Hargrove Academy. She was wearing the school's uniform, a navy blazer, white-collared shirt, a plaid skirt in the school's colors of navy and gold. She was standing at the school's front entrance, and the look on her face was not the performative smile of a child told to smile for a photo. It was something more interior, a brightness that came from somewhere specific. She had wanted this school. She had wanted it the way 12-year-olds want things before the world has taught them to manage their expectations. Elijah picked up the photograph and held it with both hands and looked at his daughter's face for a long moment. He had chosen Hargrove Academy, the way he had chosen everything in the 3 years since Serena died, carefully researched according to a set of criteria he had developed to compensate for the fact that he was now making decisions that the two of them had always made together. Hargrove was a K-12 private academy in a suburb 40 miles outside Washington. Its academic record was exceptional. Its acceptance rate was 11%. Its website featured a full page dedicated to what it called its equity commitment, with photographs of students of varying backgrounds studying together, eating together, laughing together in sunlit hallways. It had a robust financial aid program, an arts program that had produced 2 Juilliard admissions in the past 5 years, and a counseling staff that its admissions materials described as dedicated to the social and emotional well-being of every enrolled student. Elijah had read those materials twice. He had taken Imani on a campus tour in March. He had spoken with 2 other parents whose children attended, both of whom were Black, both of whom had spoken positively about the school's culture. He had written a check for $45,000 and signed the enrollment papers in April, feeling something that in the privacy of his own interior life he could only call relief. The relief of a man who had done the work, made the right choice, secured a good future for his child. He put the photograph down. On his desk beside the cold coffee and the remaining 14 pages of the briefing packet, his phone showed 6 unread text messages from Imani. He opened them. They were dated across the past 3 weeks after school check-ins, a photo of a paper she'd gotten back with an A- and a teacher's note in the margin that said, "Excellent analysis," a short message from last Thursday that read, "School's good, Dad. Don't worry, focus on your work," and this morning's message sent at 7:52. "Happy birthday to me, Lowell. Miss you. Love you." He read that last message 3 times. "Happy birthday to me, LOL." She had texted herself a birthday wish. She had done it with the particular lightness of a child who has learned to take up as little emotional space as possible around a parent who is busy, which was to say, she had done it with the particular lightness that should have alarmed him months ago. "Miss you." He thought about the last time he had seen her in person. Not a video call, not a rushed phone conversation at 9:30 on a Tuesday, but actually seen her sat across a table, eaten a meal, been present in the specific way that presence requires you to put your phone face down and look at the person in front of you. He went back through his calendar. Scroll, scroll. A Saturday in February, nearly 7 weeks ago, he had driven out to Hargrove for a school event, a winter concert, and they had eaten dinner afterward at a restaurant near the school. Imani had ordered the salmon and eaten about half of it. She had talked about a history project she was working on. He had talked about a congressional hearing he was preparing for. They had hugged in the parking lot, and he had driven back to Washington, and she had gone back to the school's boarding wing where she had lived since September, because the commute from Washington was impractical, and because Hargrove had a well-regarded residential program that he had also researched carefully. 7 weeks ago, he called Paulette into the office. She appeared in the doorway with her notepad already open, which was the posture of a woman who had correctly anticipated that whatever came next would require action. "Cancel the 11 o'clock, Elijah said, and the 1:30. Move whatever can move and hold whatever can't." Paulette's pen did not move. "The 1:30 is the briefing with the Senate Education Committee staff. They've rescheduled twice. Hold that one and cancel everything else. I'll be back by 4. "Where?" She stopped herself because whatever showed on his face in that moment resolved the question. He left without his briefcase. He took the stairs instead of the elevator, which was not a thing he typically did, and walked the 14 minutes back to his apartment to get his car. He changed out of his suit jacket and into a gray quarter zip that had been hanging on the back of his bedroom door since the last time he'd worn it, which he couldn't remember. He found his car keys in the dish by the front door. He sat in the car for a moment before starting it. Serena had been a 4th grade teacher at a Title I elementary school in Southeast Washington. She had taught the same grade for 9 years, which was long enough that she had started receiving the younger siblings of her original students. She believed in public education with a conviction that was not ideological, but personal, rooted in the specific accumulated evidence of what happened to children when the adults around them showed up consistently. She had opinions about Elijah's work that she delivered without softening, because she thought softening policy feedback was its own form of disrespect. She had told him 3 weeks before the diagnosis that changed everything, that the problem with people who worked in education policy was that they spent all their time thinking about systems and forgot to think about the individual child inside the system. He started the car. The drive from Washington to Hargrove Academy took 40 minutes on a clear day. He spent the first 20 on the hands-free call he had been avoiding for 2 days, a conversation with his deputy secretary, Adayeze Okafor, regarding a compliance audit in 3 Texas districts that had taken on political dimensions neither of them had anticipated. Adayeze had the kind of intelligence that identified the exact load-bearing wall of a problem on first inspection, and listening to her work through it was useful, even when the conclusions were difficult. He held the Texas issue in the back of his mind, said the things that needed to be said, then ended the call somewhere past the Beltway and rolled down the window. The air outside Washington had a different quality in April, looser, carrying something green and wet that the city air had pressed out of itself. He drove without music. He passed a town with a water tower and a diner and a post office, then another town, then a stretch of road that was mostly horse fencing and old oak trees with new leaves coming in pale and small. He thought about the last real conversation he and Amani had, the one that qualified as a conversation rather than an exchange of information. It had been on a Sunday phone call in March, and she had been telling him about a book she was reading for English class, something about a girl who runs away from home and ends up in New York City. He had asked her if the girl was trying to escape something or trying to find something, because he was genuinely curious, because the distinction mattered, and also because it was the kind of question Serena would have asked. Amani had been quiet for a moment, considering it, and then said, "Both, I think. Maybe those aren't that different." He had felt something open in his chest when she said it. Recognition, pride, the particular emotion of watching a child think in a way that surprises you. Then his other phone had rung, and he had said, "Hold on," and it had been the overnight duty officer with something that couldn't wait. And by the time he got back to Amani, she had said, "It's okay, Dad. I know you're busy," and they had wrapped up quickly, and he had told himself he would call back the next day with time to continue the conversation. He had not called back the next day. He pulled off the highway at exit 14 and took the county road toward Hargrove. There was a deli on the left side of the road, about a mile before the school's main entrance. He had taken Amani there twice during the campus visit weekend in March of the previous year, a narrow place with wood-paneled walls and a counter that ran the length of the room and a menu written in chalk above the register. She had ordered a turkey and Swiss sandwich, both times extra pickles, and she had eaten it with the focused pleasure of someone encountering a specific thing they had been wanting without consciously knowing it. He pulled into the deli's small lot. A bell above the door chimed when he entered. The woman behind the counter, gray-haired efficient, wearing a green apron, looked up. Something shifted in her expression, the slight recalibration of a person who has recognized a face from somewhere but can't immediately place the context. "Turkey and Swiss," Elijah said. "Two of them, extra pickles on both." She nodded, turned to the cutting board. While she worked, he stood at the counter and looked out the window at the road. A school bus passed, going in the direction of Hargrove. He watched it until it was out of sight. "Haven't seen you in a while," the woman said, not turning around. "Work," he said. She wrapped the sandwiches in white paper, put them in a brown bag, folded the top twice. When she handed it across the counter, her expression had settled into something that was not quite sympathy and not quite judgment, the look of someone who has watched enough people pass through a place to have developed opinions they keep to themselves. He paid in cash and left. The visitor parking at Hargrove Academy was a small lot off the main entrance, separated from the faculty lot by a low hedge that had been trimmed into perfect geometric precision. The school's main building was a converted 19th century estate that had been added to over the decades until it had become a sprawling compound of connected structures in varying architectural styles, unified by the same limestone facing and the same heavy oak doors. The front lawn was immaculate. The fountain in the circular drive was running. A stone wall ran the perimeter of the property, high enough to establish the boundary clearly. Elijah signed in at the front desk. He gave his name as Elijah Webb, Amani's father. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset around her neck, handed him a yellow sticker badge with "Visitor" printed in black block letters and told him in a practiced tone that lunch service would be concluding in about 20 minutes and he'd find the cafeteria through the main hall, first left, past the library. He walked. The main hallway of Hargrove's original building was wide and high-ceilinged with dark wood paneling and marble floors that had been worn smooth in the center from decades of foot traffic. On both walls, in matching dark frames, hung photographs of alumni going back to the school's founding in 1923. Row after row of formal portraits, class photographs, athletic teams, debate squads. He walked slowly, not out of sentiment, but out of the kind of professional attention that had become reflexive after years of reading documents designed to present one reality while concealing another. What he noticed walking the length of that hallway in the photographs from 1923 through approximately 1987, every face was white. In photographs from 1988 onward, there were occasional exceptions. In the most recent decade, there were somewhat more 3, 4, sometimes 5 students of color in photographs of classes of 30 or more. And then, at the very end of the hallway, before it turned left toward the library, hung a single large photograph in a slightly newer frame with a different border style, a group photograph of approximately 25 students. Every one of them was black or mixed race. The small brass plate below it read, "Diversity Cohort 2019, not the class of 2019, the diversity cohort." The photograph was hung at the end of the hallway, after the turn where the natural foot traffic of the main corridor did not reach. You would not see it unless you walked past it deliberately. Elijah stood in front of it for a moment. Then he turned left and walked toward the cafeteria. He heard the cafeteria before he reached it, the layered sound of 400 young people in a large room, the particular acoustic texture of trays and chairs and voices in an enclosed space. Through the small window set into the door, he could see movement, like the general appearance of a normal school lunch period. He pushed open the door. What he saw in the first 3 seconds rearranged something structural in his understanding of the past 7 months. Beverly Stanton, 58 years old, gray hair pinned back heels striking the tile floor with the rhythm of authority practiced so long it had become unconscious, had her hand around Imani's upper arm and was pulling her away from a table in the center section of the cafeteria. Not leading, pulling. The way you move an object from one place to another when you have decided the object does not warrant consideration. Imani stumbled. Her lunch tray caught the edge of the table and went sideways, and the sound it made when it hit the floor was not loud, but it was sharp enough that the nearest tables went quiet. Milk spread across the tile. A roll landed near the leg of a chair. Someone at the next table laughed a single bright note that carried the specific quality of laughter that knows it is permitted. Beverly Stanton's voice did not lower. It did not modulate. It carried across the cafeteria with the confidence of someone who had said the same thing in the same place so many times that the words had become policy simply through repetition. Imani Webb, what did I tell you about sitting here? These tables are for real families, not charity cases like you. The brown bag with 2 turkey and Swiss sandwiches, extra pickles fell from Elijah's hand. It hit the floor with a soft sound that nobody else in the cafeteria heard because the room's attention had moved to the spectacle near the center tables, to Imani, kneeling now to pick up the pieces of her lunch from the floor, her shoulders drawn inward, her head down in the particular posture of a child who has learned that making herself smaller is a form of self-protection. Elijah's first movement was forward. He was already 2 steps into the room before something stopped him. Not hesitation, not fear, but a calculation that arrived with the cold clarity of someone who has spent years understanding how institutions protect themselves. If he walked across that cafeteria right now and confronted Beverly Stanton in front of 400 students and a dozen staff members, what would happen? She would apologize. Norris would be summoned. There would be a meeting with carefully chosen language about a misunderstanding about school policy being imperfectly applied, about taking the concern seriously. Imani would be returned to a situation that was now slightly more dangerous because the people running it would know that her father knew, and they would be more careful, and more careful meant harder to prove. The next parent who walked into this cafeteria without a name that carried weight would find nothing changed and no record of anything having been addressed. He had spent 14 months designing a federal initiative to stop precisely what was happening 10 feet in front of him. He understood at a level of professional expertise that most people in the country did not have what systematic discrimination looked like when it was functioning exactly as designed. It looked normal. It looked like school policy. It looked like a woman with 30 years of institutional authority moving a child to a different seat. And it continued because the people who witnessed it had been taught that this was how things worked. 2 steps back, behind a support column wide enough, the angle correct. His phone was in his jacket pocket. He had it in his hand and had tapped the record icon before he had consciously decided to do so. His thumb steadied. 28 minutes. What those 28 minutes revealed unfolded in layers, the way damage always reveals itself. First, the surface, then the structure beneath it, then the foundation. The surface was Beverly Stanton. She moved through the cafeteria with the authority of someone who had been running this space for long enough that her preferences had been codified into rules, her rules into culture, her culture into something that felt to everyone inside it like simply how things were. The center section, Zone A, as the laminated table markers identified, it was furnished with padded chairs and round tables that seated 6 comfortably. The windows on the south wall let in the afternoon light. A water dispenser with cups stood accessible against the wall. Students came and went from it, freely refilling as needed, pausing to talk. Zone B occupied the northeast corner of the room. 8 rectangular tables with bench seating bolted to the floor. The overhead fluorescent fixture above 3 of those tables buzzed in a way that suggested a ballast on its way out. The northeast corner was adjacent to the kitchen service entrance, and every time the door swung open, it let out a pressurized exhale of cooking heat and the residual smell of the industrial dishwasher. Amani's seat was at the end of the bench, nearest the kitchen door. Elijah counted. Zone A, 41 students. Of those, 40 appeared to be white. 1 was Asian. Zone B, 9 students. 7 were black. 2 were white. Both of them he noticed wearing the red lanyards that identified them as scholarship recipients under a different program than the equity admission track. The line was not purely racial, but it was not random either. It had been drawn with care. The structure beneath the surface revealed itself 20 minutes into the footage when Elijah's camera found the bulletin board mounted on the wall 6 feet from where he was standing. Among the cafeteria reminders and the school calendar and a laminated sheet about allergy protocols, there was a single-page document in the school's letterhead font. It was titled Hargrove Academy Cafeteria Seating Policy, Spring Semester. He zoomed in slowly, steadying the frame. The document had 3 numbered points. The third point read, Zone A seating is reserved for legacy family members and annual fund contributors at the $10,000 level or above. Students admitted under the Equity Admission Initiative are assigned to Zone B seating. Zone assignments are not subject to student preference. Below the 3 points, the signature of Principal Garrett Norris. Beverly Stanton had not invented this. She was enforcing it. Elijah held the camera on the document for 4 full seconds, long enough for the text to be legible on playback. Then he moved the camera back to the room. Beverly was standing in the center of Zone A, now hands clasped, surveying the space. A student from Zone B, Darnell Price, 13 years old, his name visible on the ID badge clipped to his blazer, raised his hand. Beverly looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already processed and filed. Mrs. Stanton, may I please get some water? I have track practice after school. Zone B students had their refill window. It was 7 minutes ago. Sit down. I said sit down, Darnell. He sat. His hand went to the table in front of him, and he pressed his palm flat against the surface in a gesture that was too controlled for his age, the gesture of someone who has learned to redirect physical frustration somewhere it won't be seen. 34 seconds later, a student from Zone A walked to the dispenser, filled his cup, refilled it, carried both cups back to his table without breaking his conversation with the person next to him. Beverly was speaking with a parent volunteer near the faculty table. She did not look up. Ms. Lorraine Tully was 27 years old and had been teaching English at Hargrove for 3 years. Elijah had seen her name on the faculty page of the school's website when he first researched the place next to a headshot in which she was smiling in a way that suggested she had taken the photograph seriously. She entered the cafeteria through the east door at the 17-minute mark, carrying a canvas bag and a stack of papers she was reviewing as she walked. Heading in the direction of the faculty seating area on the west wall, her route took her past the Zone B tables. She slowed, not stopped, slowed. Her eyes moved to Amani's face, which at that moment was turned slightly away from the main room toward the kitchen door, and which showed to anyone who knew how to read it the compressed expression of a child managing more than a child should have to manage alone. Lorraine Tully's left hand came up slightly, not quite a gesture, more like the beginning of one. She turned toward the Zone B section. Beverly Stanton from 30 feet away looked up. The look lasted 2 seconds. It communicated nothing in particular. It communicated everything. Lorraine Tully's left hand came down. She adjusted the stack of papers. She continued toward the faculty tables. Elijah held the camera on her retreating figure for a moment before moving it back. The silence of the moment she had just chosen would appear in a federal filing in approximately 8 months. At the 22-minute mark, Beverly positioned herself in the open space between Zone A and Zone B, clapped once, a single sharp sound that stilled the room, and spoke in the tone of someone delivering a prepared statement they have delivered before. I want to take a moment to remind everyone of what makes Hargrove the institution it is. Hargrove was built by families who invested in something lasting. Legacy families. Families who understand that excellence has a cost and are willing to pay it. Those families have earned the right to certain things in this building. She let the pause sit. Other students are here because Hargrove believes in opportunity. That is a gift. Gifts come with conditions. Guy. Her eyes found Amani. Some students need to be reminded of that more often than others. Elijah's hand was steady. He did not move. The 28th minute arrived without announcement. There was no additional incident, no further public declaration from Beverly. The lunch period was simply ending, students returning trays, the room beginning to clear, in the unhurried way of an institution where the schedule runs on its own momentum. Beverly moved toward the kitchen entrance to supervise the transition. Elijah stepped out from behind the column. He crossed the room in the particular way that a person crosses a space when they have made a decision they will not reverse, not fast, not slow, but with a directness that moves through the ambient noise of the room without disturbing it. He reached Amani's table and put his hand on her shoulder gently, the way he had put his hand on her shoulder 10,000 times before. She looked up. The expression on his daughter's face, in the moment she recognized him, was something he would carry for the rest of his life. It was not simple happiness to see him. It was the complex, terrible relief of a person who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, combined with the immediate fear of what his presence here meant for her, and it crossed her face in the span of about 2 seconds before she brought it under control. 12 years old. She had learned to bring things under control. Hi, baby. The words came out quiet. I brought you lunch. Beverly Stanton appeared from his left. She had the expression of a person processing an interruption to a system that was not supposed to be interrupted. And who are you? Elijah looked at her. He took 2 full seconds to do it, to look at the face of the woman who had spent 5 months turning his daughter into someone who texted herself birthday wishes and called it fine. Beverly Stanton, 58 years old, 31 years at this school, a person so embedded in an institution that she had long ago stopped distinguishing between its rules and her own authority. I'm Amani's father. The conversation that followed was brief and clear and ended the way that conversations end when one party has decided they are managing a problem rather than engaging with a person. Garrett Norris arrived within 4 minutes, gray-haired, compact, wearing the practiced calm of an administrator who had handled difficult parents before and expected to handle this one the same way. He did not ask what had happened. He asked Elijah to lower his voice, though Elijah had not raised it. He said the word protocol 3 times in 40 seconds. Beverly, emboldened by Norris beside her, looked Elijah over with the deliberateness of a woman making a point. The quarter zip, the absence of a briefcase, the plain car keys visible in his jacket pocket. Her voice dropped to a register that was somehow more cutting for being conversational. I've been here 31 years. I've seen fathers like you come and go. You got your daughter in through an equity program, which is wonderful, but that doesn't dissolve the school's standing policies. Now, I would suggest you leave before this becomes something that affects Amani's enrollment status. Or, 2 security guards materialized from the east corridor, not called, summoned by some signal Elijah had not caught. They positioned themselves on either side of him with the practiced geometry of people who had done this before. Imani's hand found his arm. Her grip was tight in the specific way that children grip things when they are trying to hold something in place. "Please, Dad." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Just go. I'll be okay. I've been okay." He looked at her face when she said it. 5 months of okay. 5 months of managing this alone, of protecting him from it, of coming back here every morning and sitting in the corner and texting him that school was fine so that he could keep his schedule clear for the governors and the senators and the 14-hour days. She had been carrying this so that he wouldn't have to. He let the guards move him toward the door without resistance, because resistance in this moment would give Norris exactly the language he needed for the paperwork that was already Elijah was certain being mentally drafted. He kept his hands visible and his pace steady, and he did not look back until he was in the doorway, and then he turned and looked at his daughter one time. "Hold on, baby. One more hour." His voice was level. "I promise." The door closed, the lock engaged. He stood in the empty hallway for a moment, then he walked through the main corridor, past the diversity cohort photograph at the end of the hall, out through the oak doors, across the limestone steps, into the April afternoon. The security guards flanked him to the parking lot and waited while he got into his car. He sat behind the wheel. The brown bag with the 2 sandwiches was still on the passenger seat where he'd left it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened his phone, navigated to the footage, confirmed it was intact, 28 minutes clear, audio, stable image, every word audible. He thought about Serena. He thought about the specific things she had said 3 weeks before the diagnosis, about people who work in education policy, about systems, about the individual child inside the system. He opened his contacts. The first call went to the FBI Civil Rights Division, his identification code, his direct line authorization, the specific statutory framework, Title VI, Title IX, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He spoke them in sequence without referring to notes because they were the architecture of his professional life. The duty officer verified his credentials in under 90 seconds and confirmed a field team could be on site within 40 minutes. The second call went to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the third to his Deputy Secretary, Adayeze Okafor, who picked up on the first ring and listened without interrupting for 60 seconds before saying with the characteristic precision that made her indispensable, "Send me the footage. I'll have a preliminary funding hold prepared by the time you're done making calls." The fourth call went to the White House counsel's office. He made 2 more calls after that. He was methodical. He was thorough. He was doing what he did, what he had always done, what he was genuinely good at, which was constructing a case that could not be walked back, an intervention that could not be explained away, a record that would outlast whatever Garrett Norris was drafting in his office at this exact moment. And the whole time he sat in the parking lot, making his calls, moving through his contacts with the efficiency of someone executing a plan inside his chest, was a pressure. He was not addressing a weight. He was not naming, because there was work to do first, and the weight had been there for 3 years, and he had gotten good at carrying it without putting it down. "Happy birthday to me, LOL. Miss you. Love you." He finished his last call, set the phone face down on the passenger seat, picked up the brown bag, unfolded the top, and looked at the 2 turkey and Swiss sandwiches wrapped in white paper. He had ordered extra pickles on both. He had done that without thinking, out of a knowledge of his daughter that was so deep it operated below conscious decision, and it was that more than anything, the automatic knowledge of what she liked, that undid him for a moment quietly. In a parking lot 40 miles outside Washington, while 12 state governors were being notified that their afternoon briefings needed to be rescheduled, he folded the bag close. 40 minutes. The field team would be here in 40 minutes. He looked at the school's front entrance through the windshield and did not look away. The first federal vehicle arrived at 43 minutes, not 40, because the team had stopped 2 blocks from the school entrance to coordinate with the second vehicle that had come in from a different direction. Elijah knew this because he had watched the street from the parking lot without moving from the driver's seat, the brown bag still on the passenger seat, his phone face up, now with the call log, visible 6 outgoing calls in 31 minutes, the last one ending 8 minutes ago. He had not eaten. He had not looked at anything except the school's front entrance and the street beyond it, the way a person watches a door they expect to open. He had spent the waiting time doing one thing, transferring the footage. 28 minutes of video clear audio transferred to 3 separate encrypted locations: his department's secure server, the FBI's civil rights evidence intake portal, his personal encrypted cloud account that Adeyeze had set up for him 18 months ago after a politically sensitive document had been subpoenaed from a state official's personal device. The transfer confirmed on all 3 before the first SUV turned onto the school's approach road. Whatever happened next, the footage existed in places that Garrett Norris did not have the administrative reach to touch. Inside the school, he knew nothing had changed yet. The lunch period had ended. Students were moving between classes. Beverly Stanton was somewhere in the building carrying the satisfaction of a problem resolved, a disruption contained, an interloper removed. She had 31 years at Hargrove. She had the institutional confidence of someone who had outlasted every challenge to the order she maintained, because the order she maintained was not hers alone. It was documented, signed, distributed in a laminated sheet on a cafeteria bulletin board with the school's letterhead at the top. That was the detail that mattered most, not her behavior, which could be explained as the excess of an individual. The document, the signature, the deliberate construction of a 2-tier system that had been reduced to policy language and approved at the administrative level. Elijah had read enough compliance reports to know the difference between an institution with a bad employee and an institution with a bad policy. One of them was a personnel matter. The other was a federal violation. The first 2 SUVs pulled into the visitor lot. He got out of the car. The lead agent was a woman named Carol Bridges, compact, mid-40s, with the specific quality of stillness that comes from years of entering rooms where the temperature is already elevated. She had read his preliminary brief during the drive. She shook his hand once firmly. "Secretary Webb, we have 12 agents. 2 DOJ observers are 5 minutes behind us. How do you want to move?" "Quietly for the next 4 minutes. I need to be inside before they know anything is happening." Bridges nodded. "We'll hold the perimeter. You go in through the front. When you're positioned, send the signal and we move." He walked back across the parking lot toward the school's front entrance, still in the quarter zip, still wearing the yellow visitor badge that the receptionist had given him 90 minutes ago. He pushed through the oak doors. The receptionist at the front desk looked up with the expression of someone who had logged his departure and was recalibrating his return. "Mr. Webb, did you forget something?" "I need to speak with Principal Norris." His voice carried the register he used in rooms where people needed to understand quickly that a conversation had moved past the stage where its outcome was negotiable. "His office, please." She reached for her phone. He was already moving down the hallway. He found Norris's office at the end of the administrative corridor, past the assistant principal's suite, past the wall of framed commendations from the State Board of Education. The door was slightly open. Through the gap he could see Norris behind his desk jacket, off reading something on his computer screen, with the relaxed attention of a man whose afternoon had resolved itself satisfactorily. Beverly Stanton was in the chair across from him. Holding a document, Elijah could see the school letterhead from the doorway. She was reading it with the focused expression of someone reviewing their own work. He pushed the door open. Norris looked up. The recalibration happened in stages: first, the recognition, then the confusion at the context, then the irritation of a man whose private space has been entered without invitation. "Mr. Webb, I thought security had—" "They did. Elijah stepped into the office, pulled the door closed behind him. "Sit down, Garrett." The use of the first name shifted the air in the room. Beverly looked up from the document. Norris started to rise, then didn't, caught between the instinct to assert authority over his own office and something in Elijah's posture that made the calculation uncertain. Elijah's phone buzzed once in his pocket. The signal he'd set Bridges confirming perimeter was established. He did not check the phone. He reached into the interior pocket of his quarter zip and removed his federal credentials, not the photo ID that accompanied the standard department identification. The full credential case leathered the seal of the United States Department of Education, embossed on the cover his name beneath the title in the specific font that appeared on documents that moved through congressional offices. He placed it open on Norris's desk. Beverly Stanton looked at the credential case. She looked at Elijah. She looked at the credential case again. United States Department of Education, Office of the Secretary, Elijah Webb. The document she had been holding, Elijah could read it fully now from where he stood. Enrollment Review Notice, subject line, Amani, Webb grounds listed as parental misconduct and creation of hostile campus environment moved slightly in her hands as the grip on it changed. The school receives $12 million annually in federal Title I and Equity Initiative funding, Elijah said. His voice had the flatness of someone reading from a record rather than making an argument. That funding is contingent on compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race in any program receiving federal financial assistance. In the past 91 minutes, I documented the systematic segregation of students by race in this cafeteria, the differential application of resource access policies, the public humiliation of a minor on the basis of her admission category, the physical handling of a student in a manner that meets the threshold for documented misconduct, the fraudulent classification of federal equity funding recipients. I'll come back to that, and the use of school administrative authority to remove a parent who raised a compliance concern. He paused. I recorded all of it. Moi. Norris made a sound, not a word, something below the threshold of language, the sound of a man whose internal architecture has encountered a load it was not designed to carry. Beverly's face had gone through several things in the past 40 seconds. The first was blankness, the short circuit of a person whose operating assumptions have been invalidated too quickly to process. The second was something that reached for its usual register, the practice authority of someone who managed problems in this building daily, only to find that register no longer connected to anything. You don't understand the context here. The seating policy is... I read the seating policy. It's on the bulletin board outside the cafeteria. It has Garrett's signature on it. Elijah looked at Norris. That document becomes Exhibit A. The sound of vehicles outside multiple doors, feet on the walkway, the particular quality of organized movement that an institution recognizes before it can name it. Norris moved to the window. What he saw, 11 people in tactical vests crossing the front lawn in two groups, one moving toward the main entrance, one moving toward the east wing access. Carol Bridges walking directly behind the first group, not rushing, with the unhurried pace of someone who has arrived at a destination they were always going to reach. Oh God. Norris turned from the window. His color had changed. Oh God, you called? FBI Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice. My deputy secretary froze your federal funding 40 minutes ago. The freeze is effective immediately, which means the school's operating account stopped receiving federal transfers at approximately 2:15 this afternoon. Elijah picked up the credential case from the desk, folded it closed, put it back in his pocket. What I'd like you both to do right now is sit down. Beverly sat, not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision before the rest of her could object. The door opened behind Elijah. Carol Bridges entered, two agents flanking her. She assessed the room in under a second, registered The two individuals seated confirmed. Elijah's position nodded once. Agent Bridges will explain the next steps, Elijah said. I need to be in the gymnasium in 4 minutes. He left the office. The hallway outside the administrative corridor was beginning to show the first signs of institutional disruption. A cluster of teachers near the library entrance, speaking in low voices with the compressed energy of people trying to determine the correct response to something they did not yet understand. A student in the upper hallway looking down through the railing at the agents moving through the main entrance. The receptionist at the front desk standing with both hands flat on the counter, her phone in front of her, uncertain whether to use it. Elijah walked through all of it without stopping. He found Adieze Okafor at the east entrance, having driven from Washington in a time that required choices about speed limits that he chose not to inquire about. She had her briefcase, her phone at her ear, a set of documents already organized. She held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes, she mouthed, still on the call. He waited. She finished, lowered the phone. The audit team pulled Hargrove's federal submissions going back 4 years, she said with the precision of someone who had been working for 90 minutes straight and was not going to waste the next 30 seconds on anything except what mattered. They claimed equity initiative funding for 52 enrolled students across the review period. We cross-reference against the enrollment records Bridges' team pulled from the school's own server 20 minutes ago. Actual equity admissions over the same period, 15 students. The difference, $9.4 million, moved through 3 shell line items into a facilities improvement fund that funded, among other things, the renovation of the donor lounge. The donor lounge, Elijah repeated. On the second floor, it has a wet bar. He absorbed this. $9.4 million in federal equity funding that was designated by the specific statutory language of the initiative he had helped author for the support of students from underrepresented backgrounds, redirected to a room with a wet bar on the second floor of a school where those students were assigned to sit in a corner next to the industrial dishwasher. What's the charge? Exposure, wire fraud, false statements to a federal agency, conspiracy. The fraud charge alone carries up to 20 years. She paused. Norris signed the federal submissions personally. Beverly Stanton is listed as the equity program coordinator on 3 of the 4 years of filings. He thought about Beverly's hand around Imani's arm. He thought about the laminated seating policy with Norris's signature at the bottom. Let's go, he said. The announcement over Hargrove's PA system was brief and gave nothing away. All students report to the main gymnasium immediately for a mandatory all-school assembly. No explanation, no indication of duration. The voice that delivered it was steady, which in a school where the PA was used primarily for schedule reminders created its own kind of unease. The gymnasium filled in 7 minutes. 451 students, 63 staff members, 4 parent volunteers who had been in the building for afternoon activities. The bleachers on both sides extended to capacity. The standing area below the basketball hoops filled with the overflow. Federal agents were positioned at each of the gymnasium's 4 exits, visible, not aggressive, present in the specific way that makes clear that the exits are noted and the room is contained. Elijah walked to the center of the court. He had spoken to rooms of 10,000 people. He had testified before Senate committees in rooms where every word would be dissected before the day was out. He had delivered policy addresses that were carried on 3 national networks. None of that was what this was. This was a school gymnasium in a suburb 40 miles from Washington, and his daughter was somewhere in the bleachers, and the people in this room had spent 5 months treating her as a category rather than a person. And some of them had thought it was wrong, and some of them had thought it was normal, and some of them had actively participated, and most of them had done what people always do when a system operates in plain sight. They had looked at it long enough to absorb it as background then stopped looking. He connected his phone to the gymnasium's AV system. The screen above the far basket lit up. My name is Elijah Webb. I'm the United States Secretary of Education. I'm also Amani Webb's father. The gymnasium processed this in layers. The students closest to the front went still first. The information moved backward through the bleachers like something physical, and the quality of the silence that followed was different from the silence of confusion. It had weight in it. I came to this school today to bring my daughter lunch. I walked in through the front entrance, wearing a visitor badge the same as any other parent. What I saw during the 28 minutes before I was removed from the premises is on this screen. He pressed play. The footage ran without narration. Beverly's hand on Amani's arm, the tray going sideways, the sound it made, the laughter from the adjacent tables, Beverly's voice level unhurried, carrying clearly through the cafeteria's ambient sound. These tables are for real families, not charity cases like you. The geographic anatomy of the room. Zone A's light zone A's padding zone. A's accessible water. Zone B's flickering fluorescent. Zone B's hard bench. Zone B's corner position adjacent to the exhaust from the commercial dishwasher. Darnell Price's hand pressing flat on the table after being denied water. The student from Zone A refilling his cup 34 seconds later without a word spoken. Lorraine Tully's hand starting to move and then not moving. Beverly's prepared remarks to the room legacy families have earned certain things in this building. Gifts come with conditions. Some students need to be reminded more often than others. The seating policy bulletin board, the zoom on the document, the signature. 28 minutes played in full. Elijah watched the room while the footage ran, not the screen. He watched a girl in the third row of the East bleachers recognize herself standing near the Zone A tables with her phone out, filming Amani on the floor, picking up pieces of her lunch and put her face in her hands. He watched a teacher in the faculty section fold his arms, unfold them, fold them again, the repetitive gesture of a body that cannot find a position of comfort. He watched 3 students from the Zone B section sitting together in the lower bleachers, watching the footage of themselves with expressions that were harder to read, something between validation and exhaustion, the expression of people seeing documented what they have known for months. The footage ended. The screen went dark. Beverly Stanton is in federal custody. Garrett Norris is in federal custody. Both face charges under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, federal fraud statutes, and additional charges currently being finalized by the Department of Justice. He let the room carry that for a moment. Hargrove Academy's federal funding, $12 million annually, is frozen effective 2/15 this afternoon. A federal compliance audit is underway. Depending on its findings, the school faces the potential loss of its accreditation. A sound moved through the gymnasium, not a single sound, a collection of them overlapping, something like a groan, something like a gasp. Someone near the back of the East bleachers was crying, the specific sound of someone crying who had not intended to and was trying to stop. I want to speak directly to the students who were assigned to Zone B. He found them in the lower bleachers, 9 of them, including Amani, who was sitting at the end of the row with her hands folded in her lap. Come down here. They came, one by one then, in pairs moving from the bleachers to the court floor with the careful gait of people who have been trained by months of a specific environment to move through institutional spaces without drawing attention. They arranged themselves in a loose group in front of him. 9 students. The youngest looked about 11. The oldest was Darnell Price, who stood with his arms at his sides and his jaw set in a way that cost him something. Elijah turned to face his daughter. She was looking at him with an expression that had stopped trying to be managed. 12 years old. He had 14 months of federal initiative design in his professional file, 41 pages of daily briefing that he read at 7 in the morning, conference calls with governors, Senate testimony budget battles, that consumed entire weeks of his life, all of it aimed in some form at the exact problem he had failed to see happening to the exact child who trusted him most. He went down on one knee. The court floor was hard under his knee, and he did not notice. "Baby, I'm sorry." The words came from somewhere below his professional register, below the measured cadence he had used for everything else in the past 2 hours. "I should have known sooner. I should have shown up before today." Imani's face did not perform composure. The composure she had been maintaining for 5 months came apart at the exact rate of a structure yielding to a force it was no longer required to resist, which is to say quickly, thoroughly, and with the specific quality of relief that is almost indistinguishable from grief. She stepped forward. He caught her. 5 months of it in the gymnasium of the school that had demanded she learn to need less she let go. He held on. The room around them had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of 450 people trying not to make noise, the quiet of people who have witnessed something that reorganized their understanding of what this day was, what this building was, what they had been part of. Lorraine Tully had been sitting in the faculty section on the west bleachers' third row from the bottom since the assembly began. She had watched the footage with her hands in her lap, and she had watched Elijah speak, and she had watched the Zone B students come down to the court floor. At the moment Imani stepped forward, something happened in Lorraine Tully's face that the students nearest her would later describe differently. Some said she looked like she was going to be sick. Some said she looked like she had made a decision, but what she did was stand up. She walked down from the bleachers. She crossed the court floor. She stopped at the edge of the group of 9 students, and she spoke not to Elijah, not to the agents at the exits, not to the cameras that would pick this up and carry it beyond this gymnasium. She spoke to the students in front of her. "I saw what was happening in that cafeteria. Every day for 3 years I saw it. I walked past it. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I needed to protect my position, that someone else would address it, that it wasn't as bad as it looked." She paused. Her voice was not breaking, but it was working hard not to. "There is no version of that where I am not part of what hurt you. I need to say that out loud, in front of everyone." The gymnasium did not respond with anything clean. There was no single reaction. What moved through the room was more complicated, the uncomfortable, specific discomfort of people recognizing a logic they had applied to their own silence, hearing it named, discovering it didn't hold up when it was said in plain language in front of 400 witnesses. Elijah rose from the floor. Imani stayed beside him, her shoulder against his arm. He looked at the gymnasium, at the teachers who had seen the footage, and now understood that their institutional memory of how things worked here was subject to federal review, at the students who had participated in the culture, the footage documented, at the parent volunteers whose presence at the volunteer tables during lunch service now placed them in the evidentiary record, at the 9 students standing on the court floor who had come to school every morning knowing exactly what waited for them in the cafeteria, because certainty, even ugly certainty, is a form of information a person learns to carry. Every staff member in this building will be interviewed by federal investigators. Every student who participated in the documented harassment of Zone B students will go through a formal disciplinary review. The records of those reviews will be maintained and will be relevant to future proceedings. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every parent who has received communications from this administration regarding Zone B seating policy is now a person of interest in a federal investigation. A woman in the second row of the volunteer section stood abruptly. One of the agents near the south exit moved his posture slightly. The woman sat back down. The practices documented today did not begin last week. They did not begin with Beverly Stanton, though she will be held fully accountable for her role in them. They were written into policy. They were signed by an administrator. They were funded in part by money that the federal government provided specifically to support the students who were being harmed. He looked at the gymnasium one more time. You're going to spend time in the coming weeks trying to decide how much you knew, how much you were responsible, how much you could have changed. That's the right question to sit with. I'd encourage you to answer it honestly. He put his hand on Imani's shoulder. She did not lean away from it. There's a woman who ran this cafeteria for 31 years, he said, quieter now, the address contracting from the gymnasium to something smaller, more interior. She believed she understood the value of things. She was wrong about everything that mattered. The assembly ended. The agents began the process of organizing witness interviews, moving through the gymnasium with clipboards, establishing the order of procedure with the efficient precision of people executing a process they have rehearsed. Students filed out in clusters. The usual social organization of a school population disrupted. The Zone A groupings from the cafeteria dissolved, scattered, reconfigured, because the architecture of that hierarchy had just been televised on the school's own AV system in front of everyone who had ever operated inside it. Darnell Price stopped near the south exit. He was still carrying his backpack, still wearing the ID badge clipped to his blazer. He turned back toward Elijah with the specific gravity of a 13-year-old who has decided to say the thing he has been holding for the full duration of the assembly. Mr. Secretary. His voice was level, carrying the particular dignity of a young man who had spent 5 months being told his thirst didn't warrant a refill window exception. Are they going to fix it? Not just here. Are they actually going to fix it? Elijah looked at him for a moment before answering. That depends on how many people in buildings like this one stop waiting for someone else to record 28 minutes before they say something. Darnell considered this. Then he nodded once with the careful deliberateness of someone filing an answer they intend to revisit. He walked out. Adaize found Elijah near the gymnasium's west exit, where he had moved with Imani so that the interview organization happening in the center of the floor could proceed without the Secretary of Education standing in the middle of it as an organizational complication. She handed him a document 2 pages preliminary that summarized the initial audit findings. He took it, read the first page, handed it back. The DOJ team is going to want to brief you at 7, she said. Confirmed. The White House counsel called while you were in the gymnasium. The press office is managing 6 simultaneous media requests. 3 networks have cameras on the front lawn. I'll give a statement before I leave. She paused, which for Adaize was the equivalent of a longer hesitation in someone else. How is she? Elijah looked at Imani, who was sitting on the bottom bleacher with her knees up and her chin resting on her folded arms, watching the federal agents work through the gymnasium with the focused attention of someone who has recently discovered that the world contains mechanisms for accountability that she had not known were available to her. She looked tired. She looked underneath the tiredness like something had been set down. She's going to be all right. The words were a statement of intention as much as observation. She's going to be more than all right. He walked back toward his daughter. The gymnasium was still full of movement, voices, the organized machinery of federal process in motion around them. Outside the building, through the gymnasium's high windows, he could see the afternoon light beginning to shift toward evening, the long horizontal gold of a late April sun moving across the front lawn where camera crews were setting up on the other side of the stone wall. He sat down on the bleacher beside Imani. She did not move away. She did not speak. The two of them sat there for a moment in the middle of everything that was happening, which was the first time in a long time they had occupied the same moment without one of them being somewhere else. I brought your sandwich, he said. It's still in the car, turkey and Swiss. Imani was quiet for a moment. Extra pickles, extra pickles. She leaned her head against his arm. Outside, through the high windows, the cameras were rolling. Inside the gymnasium, the federal process was proceeding according to its own timeline and requirements. Somewhere in the administrative corridor, in rooms that no longer belonged to the people who had run them. This morning, the paperwork of the old order was being inventoried and cataloged and prepared for its new purpose as evidence. The 31 years that had built this cafeteria were going to take longer than an afternoon to fully dismantle. Elijah knew this. He had spent his professional life understanding how slowly institutional change moved, how many forces resisted it, how many structures had to be addressed before a single child could sit at a table in the center of a room without it being an act of resistance. He knew the work ahead was specific, difficult, expensive in the ways that mattered most. But right now, his daughter was leaning against his arm, and the sandwich with extra pickles was in the car, and the footage existed in 3 encrypted locations, and Beverly Stanton was in a room somewhere in this building with her hands in her lap, and the full weight of 31 years of signed policy pressing down on her from all directions at once. He put his arm around Imani's shoulder. She did not say everything was fine. She did not tell him not to worry. She just sat there, 12 years old, in the gymnasium of the school where she had learned to need less, and for the first time in 5 months, she did not have to make herself smaller than she was. The statement Elijah gave on Hargrove's front lawn lasted 4 minutes. He had written nothing beforehand. He stood at the stone wall's entrance, where the cameras had assembled, the April light going flat behind him, the school's oak doors visible over his shoulder, and he spoke the way he spoke when the material was so fully understood that language came without scaffolding. He covered the documented violations, the funding freeze, the federal charges being prepared, the compliance audit that would determine the school's accreditation status. He said that the footage would be made available to the public through the department's press office by 9 o'clock that evening. He took no questions. He walked back to his car, collected the brown bag from the passenger seat, brought it inside to Imani, and they ate their sandwiches on the bottom bleacher of the gymnasium while federal agents worked the room around them. She ate the whole thing. Extra pickles, every one. The DOJ briefing at 7 happened by secure call. Elijah, in a borrowed office on Hargrove's second floor Adayeze, beside him with the preliminary audit documents spread across a conference table that still had a Hargrove Academy nameplate on it. The lead prosecutor assigned to the case was D.A. Rochelle Vance, 48 years old, 18 years in federal civil rights prosecution. The kind of voice on the phone that made you understand within the first 90 seconds that you were not the most prepared person in the conversation. She had reviewed the footage, the seating policy document, the preliminary audit findings, the physical description of the Zone A and Zone B sections, and the statement from Agent Bridges regarding the forcible removal of a federal official from the premises. The assault charge on the removal is clean, Vance said. The agents are documented witnesses. The footage captures the physical contact. Your credentials were not presented at the time, which actually strengthens it. They removed a citizen who raised a civil rights concern using physical force. A pause. The fraud exposure is significant. The submissions Norris signed personally represent 4 consecutive years of materially false statements to a federal agency. That's not a paperwork error. That's a pattern. What's the timeline to charges? Formal charges within 72 hours on the civil rights violations. Fraud charges follow the audit, which my team estimates at 3 to 4 weeks for the core findings. We'll move fast on both. Another pause briefer. Mr. Secretary, the footage is going to be everywhere by morning. I want you to understand what that means for the trial timeline. Every defense attorney in the country is going to argue pre-trial publicity. We need the evidentiary record to be airtight before anything goes public. The footage was transferred to your evidence intake portal at 2:47 this afternoon. Everything that came after was procedurally clean. He looked at the audit documents in front of him. Make it airtight. He stayed at Hargrove until nearly 10 o'clock that night. There were witness interviews to observe administrative procedures to authorize decisions about the school's operational continuity that couldn't wait for morning 451 students still needed to attend class the following day, which required a functioning institution, which required interim administrative leadership. Adaize had already identified a candidate for emergency placement, a retired district superintendent with a federal compliance background who could take over the administrative functions within 48 hours. When Elijah finally drove away from Hargrove that night, Amani was in the seat beside him. She had a backpack, a phone charger, a library book she hadn't opened. She had not asked where they were going. She seemed to understand, without its being stated, that the boarding arrangement was over. They drove in silence for a while. The county road was dark, just the headlights on the broken center line, the tree canopy on either side closing the sky to a narrow strip of stars. "Did you know?" she asked at some point past the second town with the water tower. "Before today." "No." She was quiet. "I thought about telling you, a lot of times." "Why didn't you?" She turned her face toward the window. "Because you were already carrying a lot. After Mom, with the job. I could see it when we talked on the phone. I could see it in how fast you were talking, how many times you'd apologize for something in the background. I didn't want to add to it." The weight of that a 12-year-old child, managing her father's burden, capacity, calculating what she could absorb alone so that he wouldn't have to interrupt his schedule, pressed against the inside of his chest with a force that had no policy, language, no statutory framework, no legislative remedy. "That is not your job." His voice was quiet, precise. "It has never been your job. Whatever I'm carrying, that is mine. You are not supposed to make yourself smaller so that I can carry it more comfortably. Do you understand me?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. "I'm starting to." He reached over and put his hand briefly on the top of her head, the way he had when she was small before she got old enough to find it embarrassing. She didn't move away from it. The footage went public at 9:14 the following morning, released through the department's press office with a 3-paragraph statement. By noon, it had been viewed 11 million times across platforms. By end of day, the number was 43 million. The clip that moved fastest was not the seating policy document, not the physical removal of Elijah from the premises, not even Beverly's prepared remarks about legacy families. It was the 18-second sequence of Darnell Price being denied water, followed immediately by the Zone A student refilling his cup without a word exchanged. 18 seconds, no narration required. Beverly Stanton and Garrett Norris were formally arrested on the third day after the incident, the charges filed in federal district court on a Tuesday morning. The arrest of Norris at his home in a suburb of the school's county was straightforward. Beverly Stanton's arrest happened at the school where she had returned against the advice that had apparently been offered to her by someone with better judgment, apparently to collect personal items from her office. She was escorted out through the main entrance in handcuffs in front of 3 camera crews that had been maintaining a loose vigil on the school since the footage went public in the specific April morning light that has a quality of exposure to it, and the images were clean, documentary, irreversible. Kendall Stanton Beverly's granddaughter was 16 years old and had posted 2 clips of Amani in Zone B to her social media accounts in the weeks prior to the incident. Both clips had been deleted within hours of the footage going public. Federal investigators had already retrieved them from the platform's server backups before the deletions were complete. Kendall was identified in the federal record as a juvenile witness. Her involvement was addressed through the school's disciplinary process, which was now operating under federal oversight. Lorraine Tully's cooperation with the FBI was documented, thorough, and in its completeness, something that could not have been predicted from the woman who had pulled her hand back from Amani's shoulder in the cafeteria. Over 6 weeks of voluntary interviews, she provided a contemporaneous account of 3 years of observed practice at Hargrove incidents she had witnessed, decisions she had made, the specific mechanisms by which the institution had communicated to its staff that the Zone B arrangement was not to be challenged. She had kept a personal journal, not with any intention of legal relevance, but out of the habit of a person who processes experience through writing, and those entries proved to have dates, names, a specificity of detail that the prosecution's case absorbed and made structural. She was not prosecuted. The decision not to prosecute was based on the legal distinction between passive observation of an ongoing violation and active participation in it. Whether that distinction resolved anything for Lorraine Tully personally was a question the federal record did not address, because the federal record was not equipped for the particular grief of a person who has done the wrong thing for reasons that made sense at the time. The civil case filed by 17 families was consolidated with the federal criminal charges for evidentiary purposes. D.A. Rochelle Vance had been right about the pretrial publicity complicating the timeline. The defense filed 3 motions related to jury pool contamination in the first 2 months, but she had also been right that a clean evidentiary record was the answer to that problem, not a departure from it. The defense had no credible counter-narrative. The policy document with Norris's signature was not a disputed exhibit. The footage was not disputed. Beverly's personal journal subpoenaed during discovery contained entries that, when read aloud in the pretrial hearing, produced a silence in the courtroom that the court reporter's transcript could not capture. One entry dated the previous October, read in Beverly's handwriting, reminded the Webb girl again about Zone B. She's persistent, the kind of persistent that wants to be told it belongs somewhere it doesn't. 31 years, and they still don't understand that wanting doesn't make it true. The Webb girl, persistent, 31 years. Vance read it in the pretrial hearing without editorial comment and moved to her next exhibit. The audit findings arrived in the 5th week. They were worse than the preliminary numbers. The full scope of the fraudulent equity funding claims stretched across 6 years, not 4, and involved not only Norris's personal submissions, but a coordinated set of false enrollment records that implicated 2 additional administrative staff members. The total fraudulent claim across 6 years, $14.2 million. The total amount actually spent on services for equity admission students during that period, $340,000. The remainder had moved through the facilities fund, the administrator compensation structure, the donor hospitality budget, which was how the wet bar on the 2nd floor had been purchased, renovated, stocked, and maintained on federal money designated for children like Imani Webb. The audit also flagged something that Adayize had suspected but not confirmed. In the initial review, Hargrove Academy was one of 9 schools in the Prestige Learning Group, a private education consortium operating in 4 states. All 9 schools received federal funding. All 9 had submitted equity funding claims. When the audit team applied the same cross-referencing methodology to the other 8 schools' records, they found similar patterns in 6 of them, claims that significantly exceeded actual equity enrollment funds that moved into administrative and facilities accounts, internal seating or scheduling arrangements that, while not identical to Hargrove's documented Zone B system, bore the structural hallmarks of the same institutional logic. Vance expanded the indictment. The Prestige Learning Group's executive director, a man named Gerald Whitfield, who had been board chair of 2 private education associations and had a named lecture hall at a Pennsylvania business school, was added to the federal charges in week 7. Beverly Stanton had not invented the system. She had not even designed the implementation at Hargrove. She had received the framework from an institutional structure that operated across 4 states, collected the federal dollars it was defrauding, and relied on the reliable tendency of each individual school to believe that its particular version of the practice was local, unremarkable, and invisible. What made Hargrove visible was a father who had shown up with sandwiches. The trial itself began in the third month. Federal courthouse, the kind of building designed to communicate the weight of the process, it houses marble, height light through institutional windows. Vance sat at the prosecution table with a case file she had been building for 11 weeks, with the focused attention of someone who understood that the purpose of this particular proceeding extended beyond its defendants. Not because she was theatrical about it, she wasn't, but because she had done this work long enough to know that a clean, documented, thoroughly prosecuted civil rights case was a different kind of instrument than a conviction alone. It became the evidentiary standard that the next case referred to. It became the precedent that the filing after that was built against. The cases that would never need to be brought because this one had been brought fully. Imani testified on the fourth day of the trial. She was 13 now. The 8 months between the incident in the cafeteria having done something to her bearing that was difficult to characterize as simply growing up, it was more specific than that, more earned. She walked to the stand without looking at Beverly Stanton at the defense table, not as an avoidance, but as an indication that the woman who had spent 5 months managing her position in a cafeteria no longer constituted an authority worth orienting toward. Vance took her through the account chronologically. The first week at Hargrove, the first time she was redirected to Zone B, the mechanics of a daily routine built around the management of humiliation, the specific calculations of a 12-year-old, determining which moments of resistance were worth the cost and which were not. The text to her father kept deliberately light, the performance of fine that had taken on its own exhausting discipline. What was the hardest part? Vance asked. Imani considered the question with the visible patience of someone who had spent considerable time with it already. The hardest part wasn't what Mrs. Stanton said to me. It was understanding that the teacher saw it, the other parents saw it, the students in Zone A saw it every single day. Nobody said anything, not because they didn't know it was wrong. She paused. Because they'd decided the cost of saying something was higher than the cost of what was happening to us. And we weren't the ones making that calculation, they were. We just lived with the result. The jury was 11 people. They watched Imani deliver this without notes, without coaching visible in her delivery, without the performed distress that defense attorneys look for as an indicator of preparation. She was simply accurate. The jury foreman, a retired postal worker from the western part of the district, would later tell a reporter off the record in the parking lot 10 minutes after the verdict that what he kept thinking about during Imani's testimony was the word we, not I, we. She had named herself as part of a group of children who had lived with a result they had not been consulted about. That plurality, that matter-of-fact documentation of shared experience, it had stayed with him through the deliberations. Deliberations took 9 hours across 2 days. The verdict was unanimous on all counts. Judge Winifred Sable had been on the federal bench for 14 years. She had a reputation for sentencing statements that were brief, precise, and carried enough moral weight to be quoted in subsequent proceedings. She read the sentencing statement for Beverly Stanton, standing not sitting, which was unusual, the kind of detail that the courtroom noticed without being able to articulate why it mattered. Mrs. Stanton, you operated within a structure that enabled you. You had institutional authority, administrative cover, and 31 years of accumulated certainty that the order you maintained was legitimate. None of that is mitigation. It is description. The children you systematically degraded were not abstractions. They were specific people in specific chairs eating lunch in a corner next to a commercial dishwasher because you had decided with the full support of your institution that their presence in the center of the room was something the school's real families should not have to tolerate. Judge Sable looked at the defense table. You were wrong about everything that mattered. The sentence reflects that. Waras Sopam Sapasamaki Mainan. 5 years in federal prison. Lifetime ban from any employment involving contact with minors. $1.2 million in restitution distributed directly to the 17 plaintiff families. Garrett Norris received 3 years permanent prohibition from employment in any educational institution, $800,000 in restitution. He wept during sentencing in the specific way of a person who is grieving his own consequences rather than anyone else's, and the courtroom received it accordingly. Gerald Whitfield, tried separately, 3 months later received 7 years, the longest sentence of the 3, reflecting the scale of the coordinated fraud across the Prestige Learning Group network. The 6 schools beyond Hargrove, where similar practices were documented, were placed under federal receivership. 3 of them closed within a year, their charters revoked, following independent audits that revealed not only discriminatory practices, but financial mismanagement of a scope that had been concealed across multiple fiscal years. The other 3 were restructured under new administrative leadership, with federal compliance monitors embedded in their operations. The civil settlement was reached before Whitfield's trial concluded. $22 million drawn from the insurance coverage of the Prestige Learning Group's parent holding company and the liquidated assets of the schools placed in receivership. The distribution to the plaintiff families was handled through a federal administered fund. Amani's portion as the named plaintiff in the lead case, the child whose footage had been the evidentiary foundation, went into an educational trust that Elijah established with the specific instruction that it was not to be touched until she made the decision about how to use it herself. Hargrove Academy did not close. The argument for closure was made by 2 of the 17 plaintiff families whose position was understandable and legally coherent. The argument for restructuring was made by Elijah in writing in a formal recommendation to the Federal Oversight Board on the grounds that closing the institution punished the students currently enrolled, including the Zone B students who had already had one institution fail them, while eliminating nothing about the structural conditions that had allowed the abuse to occur. The Oversight Board accepted the recommendation. Adayaze Okafor served as interim superintendent for 5 months. The permanent appointment that followed was a woman named Dr. Harriet Boone, 61 years old, who had spent 30 years in public school administration in urban districts and had no patience for any version of the conversation that began with the words, "Our legacy families expect." The cafeteria renovation took 8 weeks. Zone A's padded chairs were replaced with the same chairs used throughout the dining space. The bulletin board where the seating policy had been posted was removed. The fluorescent fixture above the Zone B tables that had been buzzing since before Amani's first day was repaired on the renovation's second day. Apparently, a maintenance ticket had been submitted for it twice in 3 years and not acted upon, which became a small, specific exhibit in the federal compliance documentation. The northeast corner was opened up, the bench tables, removed, the kitchen service entrance redirected so that the dining space had an uninterrupted perimeter. The space was renamed. The ceremony was small, a Tuesday afternoon in October, 14 months after the incident. Dr. Boone Elijah Amani, a representative from the Department of Justice, 8 of the 9 former Zone B students, Darnell Price, a few teachers, no press inside the building, though cameras were permitted on the front lawn. The plaque was mounted on the wall where the Zone B tables had been. Amani Webb Justice Hall. The font was simple. The brass was plain. Amani stood in front of it for a long moment before the small group gathered, looking at it with an expression that resisted simple characterization, something between recognition and discomfort, the expression of a person encountering their own name in a context they did not seek. Darnell Price stood beside her. He had grown 2 inches in 14 months. He was still wearing his ID badge clipped to his blazer, apparently by habit. "How does it feel?" he asked. She looked at the plaque for another moment. "Weird. Good weird, I think, but weird." She turned. "Does it feel different? Being in here?" "Yeah." He looked around the room, the uniform chairs, the opened-up corner, the fixed light. "It feels like a place that remembers what it did wrong. That's different from a place that forgot it." 8 months after the cafeteria renovation, Congress passed the Educational Equity Transparency Act. It was referred to in press coverage almost uniformly as Amani's Law, a designation that Elijah accepted with public graciousness and private ambivalence, because his professional understanding of legislation was that naming a law after a victim was a way of honoring a person while subtly transferring responsibility for the system's failures onto a child who had simply been required to live inside one. He said this in those terms at a Senate Education Committee hearing where he testified in support of the act's passage. The senator who had introduced the bill listened carefully, then said, "You're right. The name honors her. The law has to honor everyone who didn't have a parent who happened to be you." Elijah agreed with that. He testified for 2 hours. The act passed with bipartisan support. The act required all private schools receiving federal funding to report on an annual basis their actual enrollment, demographics by admission category, their physical allocation of facilities and resources across student groups, their disciplinary rates disaggregated by race, their internal seating and scheduling policies, and the complete accounting of how federal equity funding had been spent against the student population it was designated to serve. Compliance was audited by the Department's Office of Civil Rights on a 3-year rotating basis with mandatory reporting to Congress. Violations triggered immediate funding suspension, federal investigation, and potential criminal referral. The first year the act was in effect, 43 schools self-reported practices that they reclassified in light of the new reporting requirements as potentially non-compliant. 11 of those referrals resulted in full federal investigations. 4 schools lost accreditation. The national hotline that the department established in connection with the act received 3,200 contacts in its first 12 months. Not all of them were Hargrove. Many of them were smaller, quieter, harder to document, a bus route that only ran through certain neighborhoods, a gifted program with enrollment that somehow never reflected the demographics of the school it was housed in, a cafeteria where the good tables just happened to be where the good families sat, and nobody had written it down, but everybody understood. The hotline fielded all of them. Some led to investigations, some led to conversations that led to policies that changed without anyone being charged. Some led to nothing because documentation was insufficient or jurisdiction was unclear or the complaint was withdrawn. The hotline existed, 3,200 contacts in the first year, each one of them a child or a parent who had decided that the cost of saying something was worth paying. Elijah kept the yellow visitor badge. He did not display it or frame it. It sat in the top left drawer of his desk at the department under a notepad next to a pushpin he had never gotten around to using. Paulette had seen it in the drawer once while she was looking for a stapler and had not mentioned it. Occasionally on mornings when the briefing packet was 41 pages and the first call was with governors who wanted to relitigate implementation language, he opened the drawer for something and saw the yellow badge and let it sit there for a moment before closing the drawer. 6 years after the cafeteria incident, Hargrove Academy's June graduation ceremony was held in the school's outdoor amphitheater, built the previous year on what had been the east parking lot, funded by a capital campaign that Dr. Boone had run with the characteristic pragmatism of someone who understood that the best way to honor institutional transformation was to give it a physical form that students would use. The amphitheater seated 800. It was full. Imani Webb was 18 years old. She was the class valedictorian, which was not a surprise to anyone who had watched her move through Hargrove's academic program in the years following the restructuring. She had a full scholarship to Harvard. She had deferred it by 1 year, which she had told Elijah she was doing because she wanted time to work with the department's Office of Civil Rights on the first year Amani's Law Compliance Review, which he had facilitated with the professional understanding that his daughter's instincts about how to use her particular position were probably better than his own. She stood at the podium in the amphitheater in the outdoor June light that was different from the controlled fluorescence of the cafeteria where things had broken open 6 years earlier, and she looked at the audience, 800 people, parents, teachers, the surviving members of the Zone B group who had come back for this Dr. Boone in the front row of the faculty section, Darnell Price 2 rows up in the alumni section, already in college, already studying civil rights law, with the focused intention of someone who had made a specific decision, and she did not perform composure because she had learned over 6 years that composure was different from honesty, and she was interested in honesty. 6 years ago, I sat in a corner of the school's cafeteria and told myself that being okay was enough. I told my father the same thing in texts every day for 5 months because I thought carrying it quietly was the same as being strong. She paused. I was wrong about that. Silence isn't strength. It's just a way of making your pain more convenient for the people who caused it. Elijah was in the front row of the family section, which was where the school had seated him. He was wearing a suit, not the quarter zip, a suit because Amani had texted him the night before and said, "Please wear something that doesn't make you look like you're on your way to get sandwiches." He had found this funny in the specific way that only works when the original context has been sufficiently transformed by time. My father came here 6 years ago to bring me lunch, Amani continued, turkey and Swiss, extra pickles. He didn't come with a federal investigation. He came with a brown bag and a yellow visitor badge and a feeling he couldn't name that told him something was wrong. She looked at Elijah directly, which she had told him she was going to do, so he was prepared for it, though preparation did not appear to be helping his composure much in the moment. He stood behind a column for 28 minutes, not because he was afraid, because he understood something that took me longer to learn. A single day of anger doesn't change anything, but 28 minutes of evidence can change everything. Hey! The amphitheater was quiet in the particular way of a large outdoor space when its ambient noise has been displaced by attention. Hargrove is different now. That's real. I sit in the school's cafeteria and I feel the difference, not as a symbol, as a fact. The Zone B tables are gone. The seating policy is gone. The people who designed it and enforced it are gone. What replaced them isn't perfect, but it's accountable. It can be examined. It can be corrected. She looked out at the full amphitheater. That's the difference between an institution that changed because it was caught and an institution that changed because the people inside it decided that accountability was something they wanted to live inside of. Hargrove is still figuring out which one it is. So is every school on that hotline list. So are we. She looked at her notes once briefly, then set them aside. Somewhere right now there is a child in a corner of a cafeteria learning to make themselves smaller, learning to text their parents that everything is fine, learning that the cost of existing in the wrong place is something they are expected to absorb quietly, without complaint, for the convenience of a system that has decided, in writing or without it, that they belong somewhere less than where they are. She stopped. What you do about that is the question, not what my father did. What you do with the phone in your pocket, with the 3 minutes you have before you decide to look away, with the hand you almost extended and then pulled back. Or, she stepped back from the podium. The amphitheater gave her a long moment of silence before the applause came, which was the right instinct. Some things need a breath before they can be responded to properly. Elijah stood. He was not the first one standing, which was also right. Afterward, in the courtyard outside the amphitheater, where the reception was held, he found Amani in a cluster of her classmates and waited at the edge until the cluster shifted naturally and gave him access. She looked at him. He looked at her. They had had the important conversation the previous night, the one about the year of deferred enrollment, about what came after Harvard, about what she was thinking of doing with the position she had been placed in by circumstances she had not chosen. That conversation had gone on for 2 hours and had not resolved into conclusions so much as into the specific kind of open-endedness that characterizes a relationship that has stopped managing itself around the other person's schedule. "How was it?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly, the evaluative gesture she had inherited from her mother, and deployed when a question was not quite precise enough. "Which part?" "All of it." She thought about it. Not for long, she had already been thinking about it for 6 years. It feels like something that happened to us, and also like something we did, both at the same time. He considered this. The we was not accidental. It was the same we that Darnell Price had heard in her testimony 3 years earlier, the word that carried everyone who had sat in Zone B, everyone the hotline had received in its first year, everyone whose version of a corner table had not yet been documented or named. "That sounds right," he said. She reached over and took a small piece of his tie and adjusted it, which was something she had started doing in the past year, apparently having developed opinions about his appearance that she felt entitled to act on directly. He let her. The reception continued around them. Dr. Boone was talking to 3 parents near the entrance to the cafeteria, Amani Webb Justice Hall, visible through the glass doors behind them, its tables uniform, its lights steady, its northeast corner open and lit. Darnell Price was across the courtyard with 2 people his own age laughing at something, carrying himself with the ease of a person who has decided that the space he occupies is his to be in. The June light was full now, no longer the exposure quality of the morning, but the settled warmth of midday falling on the courtyard without distinction, reaching every corner. Elijah put his hand on his daughter's shoulder briefly. She did not move away from it. Some things, having been broken in a particular way, do not return to what they were. They become something different, not better in the sense of repaired, but more honest in the sense of known. Hargrove Academy knew what it had done. The families of 17 plaintiffs knew what had been done to their children. The students who had stood in Zone A and looked at Zone B every day for years knew what they had normalized. Lorraine Tully knew what she had decided not to do once in a cafeteria, when a hand had started to move and then stopped. All of that knowledge was permanent, specific, attached to real names in a federal record that would remain accessible for as long as federal records are kept. What Elijah Webb knew, standing in a June courtyard with his daughter, was simpler than any of it. He had almost not come. He had almost let the meeting run. He had almost let Paulette rebook the governors for later in the week, sent a text instead of driving 40 miles, trusted the brochure and the $45,000 and the photograph of his daughter's face on the day she had been full of hope about a place she hadn't yet learned to survive. He had come. That was the whole of it. He had shown up without credentials, visible without a plan, with 2 sandwiches in a brown bag, extra pickles and a feeling he couldn't name, and that had been, as it turned out, exactly sufficient. The question the footage had put to 3,000 people on a hotline to 43 schools in a first-year report to every parent who watched 18 seconds of a boy being denied water and then watched another boy fill his cup without consequence. The question was not whether the system was broken. Everyone already knew it was broken. The question was simpler than that. It was, what are you carrying in the bag you brought today, and is it enough to make you stay